Good day everyone, I am Baka Shinji and I will be discussing everything you need to know about Honkai Star Rail's newest 5-star character, the Dahlia. We will be talking about her kit, Eidolons, Lightcone options, relic sets, team synergies, and Poe verdict. Quite late to the party, but if you enjoy this type of content, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support will go a long way to help me maintain and improve the quality of these guides, as well as keep the channel afloat. And without further ado, let's get started. For starters, the Dahlia is a 5-star fire character following the path of Nihility. The Dahlia's main gimmick allows your team to deal super break damage, even though the enemy isn't weakness broken. She also provides other support capabilities that break teams will appreciate, such as weakness implants, break effect and speed buffs, and defense reduction. By bypassing one of the main weaknesses of the break archetype, she will undoubtedly bring your break teams to the next level and keep them viable for the foreseeable future. Let's move on to her kit. Her basic attack deals 100% of her attack stat to one designated enemy with a toughness reduction of 10. This is her normal basic attack, so there is nothing new to see here. Using the Dahlia's skill will deploy her zone, which lasts for 3 turns, ticking down by 1 at the start of each of the Dahlia's turns. She will then deal 140% of her attack to one enemy and enemies adjacent to it. This skill will have a toughness reduction of 20 on all enemy targets hit. While the zone lasts, the weakness break efficiency of all allies will increase by 50%, and all attacks will deal super break damage to enemies even if they are not weakness broken. Being the main selling point of the Dahlia, this allows break teams to deal damage even if they have not weakness broken their main target. Due to the 3-turn duration and easy accessibility of this zone is up for the entire fight. This also allows your team to deal super break damage to toughness locked enemies, bypassing one of their biggest counters. This mechanic is unbelievably strong and allows break teams to kill their target much faster, as they now no longer have to worry about breaking the enemy before dealing their damage. Keep in mind, however, that in order to deal super break damage, you still need to deal toughness damage, which means dealing damage to enemies with the character's corresponding weakness. Not doing this will result in no toughness damage and no super break damage by extension. This will not happen often in break teams, but it is worth keeping in mind. That's not where her synergy with break teams ends, however. The Dahlia's talent will grant Dahlia 35 energy upon entering combat and will designate herself and the teammate who triggered combat as dance partners. When there is no other dance partner on the field, the teammate with the highest break effect will be designated as the dance partner. Dance partners will be able to trigger one instance of 60% super break damage to all enemies that are weakness broken when using attacks. Additionally, when the other dance partner uses an attack, the Dahlia will launch a follow-up attack with her tail, dealing 5 instances of damage equal to 30% of the Dahlia's attack to one random enemy. Each instance of damage has a toughness reduction of 3 and restores 2 energy for the Dahlia, totaling 15 toughness damage and 10 energy per follow-up attack. The toughness reduction of this attack will also be converted to one instance of 200% super break damage. This follow-up attack will only trigger once per turn and will trigger at the start of the next wave if a wave is defeated right before the follow-up attack is used. Even though the super break multiplier is relatively weak, another instance of super break damage is nice to amplify the damage of our break carries. The follow-up attack is also nice for some extra damage, but just be careful about the timing as it may steal the break from your break carry. Despite this, the follow-up attack is still nice for helping the Dahlia get her ultimate up in 3 turns from the extra energy with some extra utility from one of her traces. And speaking of her ultimate, the Dahlia's ultimate will inflict the wilt debuff on all enemies and then deal damage equal to 300% of the Dahlia's attack distributed evenly across all enemies. The wilt debuff reduces the defense of all enemies by 18% and applies to weakness types corresponding to the elemental types of all dance partners. Take note that the toughness reduction of this skill is also evenly distributed across all enemies. Taking the Dahlia's weakness break efficiency from her zone into account, against 5 enemies, the ultimate will deal 6 toughness damage to each enemy. It will only deal the full 30 toughness damage if used on a single enemy. The wilt debuff is also very helpful to increase the damage of the entire team and allows your break carries to break more easily thanks to the weakness implant. However, the debuff is tied to an ultimate, and therefore you want to time this properly to find maximum benefit from the Dahlia's ultimate and ensure maximum uptime of the debuff. This ultimate costs 130 energy to use, so a 3-turn ultimate rotation is most likely what you will be seeing in combat. A rotation of 3 follow-up attacks, 2 skills, and 1 basic attack will give you 128 energy, almost giving you the 130 needed to cast your ultimate again. With an ERR rope, you only need 2 follow-up attacks, 1 skill, and 2 basic attacks to give you about the same energy gain. For both scenarios, getting hit only once will give you the 3-turn ultimate. Don't rely on hit RNG too much for energy however, since the enemy will spend most of their time weakness broken, as nature for break teams. The Dahlia's technique will create a dimension in front of her that lasts 20 seconds. Enemies inside the dimension won't attack you. After entering combat against enemies inside this dimension, the Dahlia will immediately deploy her zone and deal 1 instance of 60% super break damage against enemies that are weakness broken. A nice way to get your damage going right from the beginning. Let's move on to her traces. Leveling the Dahlia's traces will grant the Dahlia an extra 37.3% break effect, 5 speed, and 80% effect res. Her A2 trace will grant all other allies 24% of the Dahlia's break effect plus 50% for 1 turn. This buff is refreshed for 3 turns instead of 1 when receiving healing or shielding from another ally teammate. This effect cannot be repeated more than once in a single turn. This trace is nice to equalize the performance of break teams running a sustain and sustainless break teams, but not big enough to make running a sustain objectively better. You would still want to run a sustainless break team when the environment and circumstances allow you to. Her A4 trace will allow the Dahlia to restore 1 skill point when she launches her follow-up attack, triggering once for every 2 follow-up attacks used from her talent. This greatly helps with skill point economy, especially if you're running an easier Firefly. It would also help you find more opportunities to use the skills of your other teammates. Lastly, her A6 trace will grant a 30% speed buff to any ally that implants a weakness onto an enemy. Additionally, if it is a fire character that implanted a weakness, that character will deal an additional 20 toughness damage to each enemy implanted, as well as regenerate 10% of their max energy. The max energy regenerated from this talent is capped at 50% of the character's max energy. Only Firefly and the Dahlia herself can properly maximize this trace. For the Dahlia, this ensures that her ultimate will not hit like a wet noodle against many targets and regenerates additional energy to smoothen out rotations. With a 5 energy refund for an ult cast, the Dahlia now regenerates 18 energy after use of her ultimate and will deal a minimum of 26 toughness damage to each enemy against 5 enemy targets. For Firefly, it helps add more damage to her attacks thanks to the extra toughness damage, as well as completely eliminating her downtime with the right speed tuning. With 150 AV for Cycle 0 in MOC, you may refer to this Reddit post in the description for more specifics. The gist of this is to keep your Firefly speed between 178.4 and 188.8 with no S5 DDDs, between 162.4 and 172 with 1 S5 DDD, and between 146.4 and 155.2 with 2 S5 DDDs. E2 View qualifies as an S5 DDD since it has the same action advance value. When you are including Ron May in the team, reduce all speed points by 10, and similarly if you own an E5 plus Firefly due to the level 12 ultimate, reduce all speed breakpoints by 6. These breakpoints are important because you will be able to weave in 1 extra regular skill with Firefly, immediately re-enter ult state and get off 1 more action before Cycle 0 in MOC ends. As these speed requirements can become prohibitively high depending on your relics, Final's LC becomes a great option due to the base speed increase, making these speed breakpoints much easier to reach. If you own an E2 plus Firefly, re-entering ult state will also reset your E2 proc even if you activated it the turn prior, allowing you to squeeze 2 actions before Cycle 0 ends if the conditions allow. If you exceed the speed threshold, you will get a 5th action in the ult state, but your downtime outside of ult state will also increase, leading to a DPS loss in the long run. Other than Firefly and the Dahlia, anyone can still make use of the 30% speed bonus to squeeze in more actions. This includes Boot Hill, Anaxa, and Silverwolf. For Boot Hill speed tuning in particular, aim for 167 speed. Let's move on to the Dahlia's Eidolons. The Dahlia's E1 allows the Super Break instance granted to dance partners to be granted to all allies, with dance partners gaining an extra 40% bonus. This brings the Super Break instance of dance partners to 100%, the same as Fugue's talent. Additionally, after a dance partner uses an attack, 25% of the target's max toughness will be dealt as additional toughness damage. The toughness damage dealt by this effect will have a minimum of 10 and a maximum of 300, will only trigger once per enemy target and resets when the enemy target receives a killing blow. Do note as well that for bosses with multiple toughness bars, such as Lygos and the Judge of Oblivion, the 25% will only take into account the toughness of one toughness bar, and not the boss's total toughness with all the bars added together. This Eidolon is nothing short of amazing, allowing your entire team an additional instance of Super Break damage instead of just your Break DPS and Dahlia herself, and will also add a decent amount of toughness damage to your rotation, but that isn't the reason why this Eidolon is so strong. The toughness damage brought about from this Eidolon basically future-proofs break teams to toughness inflation, allowing them to break within a good amount of time. Not to mention that this toughness damage will get converted into Super Break damage as well, thanks to the Dahlia's Zone. In game modes such as Apocalyptic Shadow, where breaking the boss is the main objective, this greatly accelerates the rate at which break teams break the boss and therefore increases their score by a lot. To make things better, this Eidolon is not only good against bosses with big toughness bars, it's also good against trash mobs due to the toughness damage effect's lower limit. In Pure Fiction, the trash mobs usually have toughness bars of 30 or less. There are very few enemies that have toughness bars of 40 and even fewer with 60. Since the revamp of Pure Fiction in 2.7, the only enemies that have 40 toughness are the Black Tide Corroded Axe, the Servant of Tides, and Lesser Stinks. On the other hand, the only enemies that have 60 toughness are the Lordly Trash Cans and the Long Shattered Vessels from the Flame Reaver. Now then, remember Lingsha and Himiko? Lingsha's skill and Fuyan each do a 10 toughness damage to all enemies, with Fuyan dealing an additional 10 to a single target. Himiko's the Dahlia's E2 decreases the all-type rest of all enemies by 20% while the Dahlia is on the field. Additionally, when an enemy target enters the field, you inflict the Wilt debuff on them for 3 turns. While the 20% rest decrease to all enemies is a good damage increase due to how rare this kind of buff is, inflicting the Wilt debuff on all enemies is massive for keeping the uptime of Dahlia's 30% speed buff on herself. This allows you to use the Dahlia's ultimate more tactically. It is also extremely powerful in Pure Fiction, allowing you to run Lingsha DPS and Himiko into non-fire weak stages comfortably, since every enemy will have fire weakness now. Combined with E1, Lingsha and Himiko will have a field day in Pure Fiction and will net you good results for a while. With the combined might of E1 and E2, Himiko will become a contender for one of the best Pure Fiction DPS right now, and maybe for the foreseeable future for as long as Hoyo decides not to introduce toughness inflation to trash mobs. You may watch my Himiko Pure Fiction clear here if you want to see this in practice. This is the best stopping point for Eidolons for light spenders. The Dahlia's E4 increases the number of bounces on her talent's follow-up attack by 5, and each bounce will increase the damage taken by the enemy target by 12% for 2 turns. This doubles the total damage dealt from 15 to 30, and the total energy regenerated from 10 to 20, without taking into account any WBE increases. It is highly unlikely that the 12% damage taken debuff on enemies is stackable, but for E4 standards, considering that many E4s are pretty underwhelming and mediocre, this one is surprisingly pretty decent. Banger E4 art as well, by the way. Finally, the Dahlia's E6 increases the break effect of all dance partners by 150%, and action advances all dance partners by 20% every time the Dahlia launches her follow-up attack. While the 150% break effect is a nice damage increase, and the 20% action advance allows for a lot more actions, this is not particularly game-breaking for an E6. As with most E6s, only spend for E6s if you really like the character you are getting it for. As for light cone options, there's no doubt that the Dahlia's signature light cone is her best option. First, it increases the wearer's break effect by 60%, your typical stat stick ability. Second, it increases the break damage dealt by the wearer and the ally who entered combat by 32%, transferred to the ally with the highest break effect if none entered combat. This will usually be applied to both dance partners. This multiplier is very rare. The only ways to gain this multiplier are innately from Firefly's Complete Combustion or Old State, the Harmony Battle Pass Light Cone, and Fugue's E4. Since this multiplier is undiluted, This will also result in a nice damage increase in damage for your team. Lastly, when a weakness is implanted by the wearer onto an enemy target, you also recover one skill point. This effect can only trigger once and is reset when the wearer uses your ultimate. It's a nice quality of life and allows more opportunities to use skills on your various characters. Other alternative light cones include Cypher's Light Cone, which applies a good amount of defense reduction to enemies and gives a good amount of speed to the Dahlia as well. This is nice for reaching 200 speed with the Dahlia in combat, but keep in mind that the value of this light cone's defense reduction heavily falls off the more you invest it into your break team's Eidolons. Fugue's light cone can also be an option as you just get a value out of this for free by doing break things. Free-to-play options include Resolution and Tutorial. Resolution is nice for its defense reduction, but also suffers from the same issues as Cypher's Light Cone when you have a lot of defense reduction available to you already. Tutorial can also be nice for smoother ult rotations thanks to the extra 8 energy per attack. This combined with an ERR focused build can enable 2-turn ult rotations. The Herta Shop Light Cone Solitary Healing can also be a decent option thanks to the small amount of break effect it provides. For builds, there are 2 options you can take. The first is a break sub DPS build with 4-piece Iron Cavalry and 2-piece Forge. This is your typical break build after Firefly's release thanks to the increase in break effect and defense ignore for break damage. If you've been farming a lot for the break team in the past, you will likely have a bunch of these relics left over which you can use on the Dahlia. The second build is an ERR based build aimed to take as many turns as possible with the Dahlia. You'll be using 4-piece Eagle and 2-piece Fond Whack for the action advance after ult and the extra ERR respectively. This combined with Tutorial will allow the Dahlia to achieve 2-turn ult rotations. You might want to aim for a 200 speed Dahlia in combat to maximize this build. However, since you are losing so much break effect by running this build and ult rotations are not impacted too heavily when you're using the sub DPS break build, you may be better off running the sub DPS break build in most cases. You will be using an HP percent or defense percent chest, speed boots, an HP percent or defense percent spear, and the break effect rope for the break sub DPS build, and an ERR rope for the ERR based build. In fact, you may opt to use any main stat for the chest and sphere for as long as the substats are good. For substats, aim for speed until you reach 160 speed in the stats screen and as much break effect as possible. For teams, it is without question that she will be an invaluable addition to break teams. She will be replacing Ran Mei in the majority of break teams. Your break team will now consist of your break DPS of choice, a super break enabler in HMC or Fugue, the Dahlia, and the sustain in Lingsha or Gallagher. For sustainless break teams, replace the sustain with either HMC or Ruan Mei. Boot hill teams will stay unimpacted, with the 4th slot having more flexibility as it allows Bronya or Sondi as well. For Rappa, the Dahlia and Fugue are pretty much requirements. For those of you who are still on the fence on pulling for the Dahlia, should you pull for her? In my opinion, if you want your break team to be able to survive 4.x and beyond, the Dahlia is a mandatory pull. She solves the main weakness of break teams and provides a lot of utility to bring them up to speed. It is without question that she supports Firefly the best out of all break DPS, but that doesn't mean that she cannot support the others pretty well too. Boothill and Rappo will make great use of the Dahlia's weakness implant and still allow them to deal decent damage outside of break. For Lingsha, her team just got even better now thanks to Lingsha being both the sustain and DPS, allowing her to make full use of the Dahlia's A2 trace. Himiko's game-breaking synergies are mostly locked behind Eidolons, especially in Pure Fiction, but at least the extra damage that the Dahlia brings will allow Himiko to pull off unlimited Liga Sanaiwa works more consistently. However, this is where her good points end. Because her kit exclusively supports break, she cannot be slotted anywhere else. You are essentially pulling her to support only one archetype that is already falling behind, with little to no universality across other archetypes. Another factor going against her is 4.x being right around the corner, with another wave of power creep inevitably coming. This then begs the question, is your break team still worth saving? From a purely meta standpoint, and without taking into consideration your wallet or savings, if your break team consists of mostly E0 S0s without meaningful vertical investment, and you have barely any savings to complete the break team, it is best for you to save your Jades and leave break team to die by skipping the Dahlia. On the other hand, if you've already invested enough into your break team, say E0 S1 DPS and all of their business slot supports, then the Dahlia will undoubtedly be a great pull and will ensure that your break team will perform at a competent level despite HP inflation and power creep in 4.x. And with that, we have come to the end of this guide. Let me know your thoughts on the Dahlia in the comments below and how your post went. Since it's the first guide I have ever made, if you have any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comment section and I will answer or address them to the best of my ability. See you in the next video, and goodbye, and have a nice day.